You ever notice how some people just exist differently? They're not loud. They're not trying to prove anything. They're just there, quiet, unbothered, doing their own thing. And for some reason, that makes everyone else lose their minds. Here's what nobody talks about. Loners intimidate people without lifting a finger. Not because they're mean, not because they're trying to be mysterious or edgy, but because they represent something most people are terrified of: the ability to exist without needing anyone's approval. And society hates that. Let me break it down for you. Not in some boring textbook way, but the real way. The way nobody wants to admit out loud. Here's the first problem everyone has with loners. They don't need you. And that's not an insult, it's just a fact. Most people move through life like they're collecting stamps of approval. They need validation from their friends, their family, their co-workers, random strangers on the internet. They need someone to tell them they're doing okay, that they matter, that they're on the right track. But a loner, they don't play that game. Picture this. There's someone at work who eats lunch alone every day. Not because they're sad or antisocial, they just prefer it. They bring their book, their headphones, and they're perfectly content. Meanwhile, everyone else is huddled in the break room, checking their phones every 2 minutes, bouncing conversations off each other, needing that social feedback loop. And somehow, the person eating alone becomes the topic of conversation. Are they okay? Should we invite them? They're so weird. The person's literally just eating a sandwich and reading, but their comfort with solitude makes everyone else uncomfortable. They wake up, they live, they make decisions, and they don't check in with the group chat first. Now, you'd think that would be fine, right? Live and let live. But here's where it gets weird. People take it personally. Someone who doesn't need constant reassurance feels threatening to someone who does. Because if you're living just fine without chasing likes, without seeking validation, without needing everyone's opinion, then what does that say about the person who can't stop doing those things? It holds up a mirror, and people don't like what they see. So instead of reflecting, they label. They call the loner weird or cold or stuck up. Because it's easier to make someone else the problem than to admit, maybe I'm too dependent on what everyone thinks of me. Let's talk about privacy. In a world where people post every thought, every meal, every emotional breakdown for public consumption, not sharing everything feels rebellious. The loner doesn't tell you what they did last weekend. They don't trauma dump in the break room. They don't announce every minor inconvenience on social media like it's breaking news. And that makes people uncomfortable. Here's a scenario you've probably witnessed. Group chat energy dies down on Friday afternoon. By Monday morning, everyone's swapping weekend stories. Who went where, who did what, the drama, the photos. Then someone asks the quiet person, "What did you do this weekend?" They respond with something simple. Nothing much, just relaxed. And suddenly the whole vibe shifts. People exchange glances. That's it? You didn't do anything? Like staying home and recharging is somehow suspicious. The loner didn't commit a crime. They just didn't perform their weekend for public approval. But that non-answer, it eats at people for days. Because here's the thing, humans are nosy. We want to know. We want to categorize. We want to figure out who you are so we can decide if you're safe, if you're one of us, if you're a threat. But when someone doesn't hand over their entire backstory in the first 5 minutes, when they don't perform their personality for public approval, people don't know what to do with that. So they fill in the blanks. They're hiding something. They're probably judging everyone. None of that is true. The loner's just living. But the mystery creates tension. And tension makes people anxious. And anxiety makes people create stories. Here's the kicker. The loner didn't do anything. They just didn't play along with the unspoken rule that you're supposed to make yourself an open book so everyone else feels comfortable. And that silence, that privacy, it haunts people. Now here's where it gets really interesting. You know what people find truly unsettling? Someone who doesn't react. Most people are walking bundles of stress, anxiety, and emotional turbulence. They thrive on drama, not because they're bad people, but because chaos is familiar. It's predictable. It's how they bond. It's how they feel alive. But then there's the loner, sitting there quiet, unbothered, not getting sucked into the office gossip, not panicking when plans fall apart, not spiraling when someone throws shade. Let me paint you a picture. Office drama explodes. Someone sent a passive-aggressive email. The group chat is blowing up. People are taking sides, gossiping in corners, texting furiously. Everyone's invested, except one person. They're just working, headphones on, focused. When someone tries to pull them into it, "Did you see what she said?" They just shrug and say, "Yeah, I saw it," and go back to their task. No reaction, no fuel added to the fire, and somehow that calmness makes them the villain. People start saying things like, "They don't even care," or "They think they're above all this." The loner didn't do anything wrong. They just refuse to participate in the chaos. And that refusal, it makes everyone else's overreaction painfully obvious. And people hate it, because when everyone around you is losing their minds and you're just fine, that's threatening, that's uncomfortable. That makes others feel like maybe they're the ones overreacting. Spoiler alert, they are. But instead of calming down, they project. They assume the loner is cold, emotionless, secretly judging them. Because how dare someone not participate in the collective meltdown? Here's the truth nobody wants to hear. The loner's calmness isn't a superpower. They're just not addicted to the drama. They've opted out of the emotional roller coaster everyone else is riding. And that choice to not engage, feels like a personal attack to people who can't help but engage. Let's get into the real heart of why loners make people uncomfortable. They don't follow the script. Society runs on scripts, invisible rules, social choreography that everyone's supposed to memorize and perform. You're supposed to smile at strangers, make small talk, laugh at jokes you don't find funny, pretend you're busy even when you're not, show up to things you don't want to attend just to be polite. And most people do it, because fitting in feels safer than standing out. But the loner, they don't care about the script. Think about this. Friday rolls around and everyone's making happy hour plans. The energy's building, people are coordinating, the group chat's buzzing. Then someone invites the loner, and they simply say, "Nah, I'm good, gonna head home." No elaborate excuse, no fake enthusiasm followed by a cancellation later. Just a simple, honest no. And the room gets weird. "Come on, just for one drink." "You never come out." "Are you mad at us?" The loner isn't mad. They're not making a statement. They just don't want to go. But that honest boundary, that refusal to perform interest they don't feel, registers as rejection to everyone else. So they make it personal, when really, the loner's just being real while everyone else is pretending. They don't force conversations. They don't fake enthusiasm. They don't pretend to be someone they're not just to make others comfortable. They show up as themselves and quiet, honest, unbothered, and that freaks people out. Because if someone can break the rules and be fine, if they can say no, skip the party, sit in silence, dress however they want and still be okay, then what does that mean about everyone else who's been following the rules like their life depends on it? It means maybe the rules were bullshit all along. And people really don't want to think about that. So instead they call the loner arrogant or trying too hard to be different. But here's the thing, the loner isn't trying at all. That's the whole point. They're just existing. Everyone else is the one performing. Here's something most people don't want to admit. Loners see through the bullshit. They spend time with themselves. They reflect, they observe, and because they're not constantly distracted by noise and social performance, they notice things. They notice when someone's faking, when someone's lying, when someone's putting on a show, when someone's being performative instead of real, and they don't call it out, not usually. They just know. Imagine this situation. Someone's telling a story at a gathering. They're animated, exaggerating, clearly embellishing for effect. Everyone's laughing, reacting, playing along. But the loner, they're just sitting there with a slight smile, nodding occasionally, not buying it but not calling it out either. The storyteller notices. They make eye contact with the loner mid-story, trying to get that validation, that reaction. Nothing, just calm observation. And suddenly the storyteller stumbles, loses confidence, rushes through the ending. Later they'll say the loner made them uncomfortable, that they were staring or judging. But the loner wasn't doing anything. They just weren't playing pretend. And that refusal to validate the performance, it exposed the performance for what it was. But here's the problem, people can feel it. You ever been around someone and felt like they could see right through you? like they weren't buying the act. That's what it's like being around a loner if you're used to hiding behind a persona. Because the loner doesn't play pretend. They don't laugh at your fake stories. They don't feed into your need for attention. They just sit there, calm, quiet, aware. And that awareness hurts like a spotlight. People who aren't comfortable with themselves feel exposed around loners, not because the loner's judging them, but because they're judging themselves. The loner's presence just makes it obvious. So instead of dealing with that discomfort, they project it outward. That person's too intense. They're always watching. They think they're so deep. Nope. The loner's just existing. You're the one squirming. Here's a big one. Loners don't chase. They don't chase friendships. They don't chase approval. They don't chase relationships. They don't beg for attention or validation. If you're in their life, cool. If you're not, also cool. And to most people, that's wild. Here's a real-world example. Two people become friends, hang out a few times. Good conversations, good vibes. Then life happens. Schedules don't align for a few weeks. One person is texting constantly. Miss you. When are we hanging out? Why haven't you responded? The loner responds when they can, suggests a time that works but doesn't match the energy. No paragraphs, no emotional urgency, just normalcy. And the other person spirals. Do they even care? Am I annoying them? Maybe they don't actually like me. They create an entire narrative. Meanwhile, the loner was just busy living their life. They weren't playing games. They weren't testing anyone. They just don't operate from a place of need. But to someone who does, that lack of desperation feels like rejection, because we live in a culture that thrives on neediness. We're taught that needing people is what makes us human, that chasing connection is noble, that caring means constantly reaching out, checking in, making effort. But what happens when someone doesn't need that? When they're perfectly content on their own, people lose their power. Think about it. Manipulation only works if someone wants something from you. Guilt only works if someone fears losing your approval. Drama only works if someone's invested in the chaos. But a loner? They're not playing. They don't need your praise. They won't chase your friendship. They won't react to your mind games. And that makes some people feel powerless, frustrated, maybe even a little angry. Why won't they try harder? Why don't they care what I think? Why aren't they affected by this? Because they're not wired to need external validation. They're self-sufficient. And in a world where most people are desperate to be needed, someone who isn't desperate feels like a glitch in the system. Let's talk about silence. Most people are terrified of silence. They fill every gap with noise. Chatter, jokes, random observations, anything to avoid the discomfort of just existing quietly. But the loner, they're comfortable in silence. They don't need to fill the space. They don't need to prove they're interesting or smart or funny. They just are. Picture a meeting or a classroom. The teacher or boss asks a question. Silence. Everyone shifts uncomfortably. Someone blurts out a half-thought-through answer, just to break the tension. Others jump in, adding noise, filling space. But the loner just sits there thinking, not anxious, not uncomfortable, just present. When they finally speak, it's measured, thought out. And suddenly everyone's paying attention, not because what they said was revolutionary, but because the silence before it created weight. And people start making assumptions. They only talk when they have something important to say. They're so confident. They must be really smart. Though this could be true. But the loner was just comfortable not performing. That comfort in silence reads as power to people who can't handle 5 seconds of quiet. And you know what people assume when someone's silent? That they know something. Silence reads as confidence, as hidden intelligence, as mystery, as power. Even if the loner's just sitting there thinking about what to eat for dinner, others assume they're calculating, observing, judging. Because we've been conditioned to believe that real confidence doesn't need to announce itself. So the loner, who's literally just existing, gets labeled as intimidating, arrogant. And here's the irony. The people who talk the most are usually the least confident. They're filling space because they're uncomfortable with themselves. The loner's not filling space because they don't need to. But instead of recognizing that, people create a narrative. Nope, they just don't need to perform for you. Here's the final piece. Loners are hard to read, not because they're actively hiding anything, but because they don't broadcast every emotion. They don't wear their heart on their sleeve. They don't signal their feelings for public consumption. And for people who rely on reading social cues to feel safe, that's terrifying. Here's how this plays out. Someone makes a joke at the loner's expense. Everyone laughs, looks at the loner for a reaction. The loner just smiles slightly and goes back to what they were doing. No anger, no embarrassment, no defensive comeback, just nothing. And suddenly the joker feels uneasy. Did they cross a line? Is the loner mad? Are they plotting revenge? The group chat later. Do you think they're upset? I can't tell with them. They're so hard to read. Meanwhile, the loner genuinely didn't care. The joke didn't land, didn't hurt, didn't register as important. But because they didn't perform the expected emotional response, didn't laugh along, didn't act hurt, didn't retaliate, everyone's now paranoid. The loner's neutral response created more anxiety than any outburst would have. Most people use emotional transparency as a survival tool. They scan faces, voices, body language, trying to figure out, am I safe? Are they happy? Are they mad? Do they like me? But when someone doesn't give those signals, when they stay calm, neutral, private, it creates anxiety. What are they thinking? And instead of just asking, people spiral. They project, they assume the worst, because unpredictability feels dangerous. And the loner, by simply not performing emotions for public consumption, becomes unpredictable. But here's the reality. The loner's not unpredictable, you just don't know them. And you don't know them because they haven't invited you in. And that's okay. Not everyone owes you access to their inner world. But people take it personally. And personal feelings turn into intimidation. So what's really going on here? Let's pull it all together. Loners intimidate people because they represent everything society tells us we shouldn't be. Independent, private, calm, nonconformist, self-aware, not needy, quietly confident, emotionally self-regulated. And when someone embodies those traits naturally, without effort, without trying to prove anything, it highlights the opposite in everyone else. The person who needs constant validation feels insecure. The person who can't handle silence feels exposed. The person who thrives on drama feels judged. The person who follows every rule feels threatened. But here's the thing. The loner isn't doing any of this to anyone. They're just living, existing, being themselves. The intimidation, that's coming from inside the other person. It's projection, it's insecurity, it's discomfort with their own dependence on external validation. And instead of dealing with that discomfort, it's easier to make the loner the villain. Because facing the truth, that maybe you're too dependent, too performative, too addicted to approval, is harder. So here's what I want you to sit with. If someone intimidates you just by existing, just by being quiet, private, independent, what does that say about you? Not them, you. What are you afraid they see? What are you afraid they'll expose? What part of your performance are you scared they're not buying? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. If you're secure in yourself, other people's independence doesn't threaten you. If you're comfortable with who you are, someone else's silence doesn't make you anxious. Their calmness doesn't highlight your chaos. Their self-sufficiency doesn't make you feel small. But if you're not, if you're running on external validation, performing for approval, constantly seeking reassurance, then yeah, a loner's going to feel intimidating. Not because they're doing anything to you, but because they're not. And that refusal to participate in the social game everyone else is playing is the most threatening thing of all. Look, if you recognize yourself in this, if you're realizing you've been intimidated by someone who's just quietly existing, that's okay. Self-awareness is the first step. But here's what you can do. Stop projecting. Stop assuming someone's silence means judgment. Stop assuming someone's independence means arrogance. Stop assuming someone's calmness means they're cold. Maybe, just maybe, they're just comfortable with themselves in a way you're not yet. And instead of making that about them, use it as a mirror. Ask yourself, why does their independence bother me? Why do I need them to perform for me to feel safe? Why am I uncomfortable when someone doesn't need my approval? Because the answers to those questions, they're not about the loner, they're about you. And if you're the loner reading this, the one who's been called weird or intimidating or stuck up just for existing, you're not the problem, you never were. Keep being yourself. Keep living on your terms. Keep refusing to perform for people who can't handle authenticity. The right people will get it. The right people won't be intimidated. The right people will see your independence as strength, not a threat. Everyone else, let them be uncomfortable. That's their work to do, not yours. If this resonated with you, comment below. Are you the loner or have you been intimidated by one? Let's talk about it, because this conversation, it's just getting started.